Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Wednesday morning, September 13th. We've been tracking Hurricane Lee for many days now, and it continues to appear as if it'll now begin a turn to the north and head towards eastern New England, Nova Scotia region by the early part of the upcoming weekend. It is really time to start preparing for potential hurricane force winds in eastern New England all the way to Nova Scotia part of Canada, the Canadian Maritime provinces. This system may weaken a bit just before reaching that part of North America. However, its wind field is likely to expand, which is kind of typical of a tropical system. When it moves to higher and higher latitudes, the overall wind field tends to kind of spread out. And that certainly raises a chance here for some hurricane force winds, places like Cape Cod, for example, anywhere around eastern Massachusetts, Rhode Island, all the way up, of course, to Maine and Nova Scotia to the east there. Certainly can experience some hurricane force winds. And we're talking again about late Friday, Saturday, into the middle part of the upcoming week, and for the likely timetable here for the strongest winds and the heaviest rains. We have a lot to talk about this morning. Let's start off here with the latest satellite imagery loop. This is using the GOES East satellite, which gives a great view of the Atlantic Ocean, and we have a few systems out there to talk about. First of all, way in the far eastern Atlantic, there's a wave out in this area right here that we'll have to monitor over the next several days. This is Hurricane Margot, pretty much a fish storm. It will just slowly fade away and die out over the cold waters of the North Atlantic. And here is Hurricane Lee. Remains rather consistent over the past few days as a Category 3 storm system with maximum sustained winds of 115 miles per hour. Still slowly pushing to the northwest, but it will make a turn to the north over the next 24 hours, start to increase in speed to the north on Thursday and Friday, and again, kind of head right towards the coastline of Maine, Nova Scotia, right in that region by the early part of the upcoming weekend. One thing you can notice, it is a rather large storm system, and again, the wind field tends to even spread out even more so than what we're seeing right now associated with Hurricane Lee. As the tropical systems become extratropical or post-tropical up in the higher latitudes, again, their wind field tends to spread out, so it could actually impact a larger area up north as compared to what's happening right now. Of course, what's happening right now is out over the open waters of the Atlantic, but Bermuda is right in this position right here, and it will certainly experience tropical storm conditions probably tonight and tomorrow. Well, here's the official positioning by NOAA's National Hurricane Center of Lee right here, and again, it is a Category 3 storm with maximum sustained winds of 115 miles per hour. This is Bermuda right here, and it will push the general direction, continue a little bit longer on the northwest, then start to turn to the north and basically head towards this area right here. And at the last moment, really the last several hours, kind of bend back to the north and west. Again, making landfall anywhere along the coast of Maine to Nova Scotia, right in this general region right here. However, again, its wind field will tend to spread out. It certainly can impact eastern Massachusetts, maybe a part of Connecticut, the eastern half of Connecticut, Rhode Island. So this entire area has to start preparing for potential hurricane force winds and, of course, heavy rains as well. Eastern New England to Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and again, we'll talk about this in a moment here, but that strong high-pressure ridge will intensify over the northwest Atlantic. That will prevent any kind of a harmless move by Lee out into the open waters of the North Atlantic. Instead, with that strong ridge up in this part of the North Atlantic, it'll actually cause it to kind of bend back to the north and west. And let's kind of clear the deck here. Again, very likely right in this area right here will be the landfall area, maybe on Saturday. Again, it can go in a direction like that and then even bend back to the north and west during those last several hours before landfall. And here's the official forecast position as put out there by NOAA's National Hurricane Center. I really agree with this in general here. Again, a turn to the north over the next 12 to 24 hours or so to the west of Bermuda will still be impacted by tropical storm conditions later today, tonight, into the day on Thursday. And then again, a little bit of a push back to the north and west as the strong upper level ridge intensifies over the northwest Atlantic, and that will again prevent any kind of a harmless track of Lee out into the open waters of the North Atlantic. Indeed, it'll start to turn a little bit to the north and west. Now, we'll see in a moment here, it will certainly move over colder and colder waters as it approaches Maine, for example, and it can weaken. But that really doesn't diminish what kind of an impact this can have. It still can produce hurricane force winds. Basically turns into a very powerful nor'easter as it becomes kind of post-tropical, takes on post-tropical characteristics. So don't be fooled by the fact that it'll potentially evolve, weaken from a hurricane to a tropical storm. It still could produce some significant impacts here across eastern New England, especially down east Maine and into Nova Scotia here. Again, we're talking about Friday night, Saturday night, maybe into the day on Sunday. Well, we just talked a little bit about the sea surface temperatures, and these are the actual sea surface temperatures right now with the system Lee generally in this area right here, and it has been for the past few days. Very warm, above normal temperatures of the southwestern Atlantic here, near 29 or 30 degrees Celsius. Bermuda right here, and it again will take a turn to the north, slide to the west of Bermuda, still move over pretty warm waters over the next couple of days, but eventually it moves over much cooler waters here. This is the hope that there's some weakening, but even with that weakening, it still can have significant impacts on New England. Again, hurricane force winds possible, for example, in Cape Cod, down east Maine, into Nova Scotia. This is the landfalling area of whether it'll be considered a post-tropical system, extratropical, or tropical storm at that particular time. Again, still need to prepare for potential hurricane force winds, eastern New England all the way to Nova Scotia, Newfoundland. It will indeed move over cooler and cooler waters by the time it gets up that far north, but still could produce some hurricane force winds. Well, I want to go through two sets of computer forecast models, the GFS and last night's European model, mainly because there's quite a good consensus between the two. Sometimes at this stage, when you're 3-4 days away from any potential landfall, you have some big differences between the computer forecast models, but quite a good consensus here between the GFS and the 0Z Euro. We're using the 0Z GFS and 0Z Euro. First of all, I wanted to show on the GFS 500 millibar height anomaly pattern here going forward as we begin the day here on Wednesday. We've talked about an incoming trough over the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, and that will begin to influence Lee. It's been basically affected by a central Atlantic Ocean ridge, pushing it on a west to northwest track over the past several days. That ridge is weakening. This trough will become increasingly important to the path of Lee and will cause it to turn to the north. Here is the reflection of 500 millibars of Lee as we begin the day here on Wednesday, September 13th. But again, this trough playing a big role in the turn to the north. Now, let's push forward here, and here we go. Again, the trough slides in the eastern U.S., but look at this orange right here over the northwest Atlantic. That is reflecting an upper-level ridge in the northwestern part of the Atlantic Ocean, and that is going to play a very important role. Here's Bermuda, by the way. Tomorrow evening, the passage of Lee to the west will certainly have some tropical storm conditions on Bermuda as it slides by to the west, but this ridge is quite strong over the northwest Atlantic, and again, with this position right here, it is really inhibiting any kind of a harmless move by Lee out into the open waters of the North Atlantic. This, by the way, is a reflection of Hurricane Margot, which will weaken out there over those open waters. But here we go now by Friday, and then it tends to turn a little bit to the north and west, all as a result of this intense ridge of high pressure aloft over the northwestern part of the Atlantic Ocean. So that is kind of forcing it back to the north and west, preventing it from moving to the northeast, to the North Atlantic. And here we go by Saturday morning, right there, down East Maine, Nova Scotia. And this is quite a consensus here between these computer forecast models. Certainly can have hurricane force winds back to the west into eastern Massachusetts, Rhode Island, maybe part of Connecticut as well, maybe even the extreme eastern part of Long Island. Certainly monitor the situation over the next few days. But here we go, Saturday morning, and then at this time it's moving over some cool waters, but still significant impact across eastern New England to Nova Scotia. And here we go into the evening hours on Saturday, and finally by Sunday morning it's up over land at that particular time over the Canadian Maritime provinces. So we'll now walk through the surface forecast maps of the 0Z GFS, and then we'll take a look at the 0Z Euro. Again, quite a consensus between the two. Let's move forward. Here's the beginning stage here on a Wednesday of Hurricane Lee. Again, still a Category 3 major hurricane at this particular time. It takes a little bit more of a trek to the northwest and then starts to turn to the north. And by the way, let's keep track here of the millibar of the central pressure about 962 here. Here's the wind field showing up at this particular time on Thursday morning. Slides to the west of Bermuda at this particular time. And here we go now into Friday morning. Still pretty similar in terms of central pressure in that 24-hour period between Thursday morning and Friday morning. Kind of maintaining its strength, 961 millibars. And then high pressure here over southeastern Canada. And again, we have that strong upper level ridge over the northwest Atlantic. Then we go into the morning hours on Saturday. And here we go. And very expansive wind field. Again, the potential for hurricane force winds back to eastern Massachusetts, Rhode Island potentially, maybe even eastern part of Connecticut, extreme eastern Long Island. Certainly looks like it's headed for down East Maine, that area between the coast of Maine and Nova Scotia. Very, very intense pressure gradient. Even if it's moving over the cooler waters, it'll have that very intense pressure gradient between that high pressure to the north and the central pressure still at this particular time 963 millibars. So it really maintains the central pressure from this location all the way up to Saturday morning just south and east of New England, and of course heavy rainfall as well. Then it moves in this particular model run right over the down East Maine, the coastal sections of Maine by Saturday evening, and continues to weaken after that, after it moves over land, now up to 988 millibars after it moves over land for a while here in the Canadian Maritime provinces by Sunday morning. Now we'll proceed the same way with the European model. Again, quite a good agreement between the two here, between last night's 0Z Canadian model and last night's 0Z European model. Here we are starting the day here on Wednesday, 959 millibars. Then it moves to the north, fairly close in central pressure. We saw that 962 on the GFS, 963 tomorrow morning on the Euro model. There's Bermuda. It slides to the west, nonetheless causes tropical storm conditions. Then, instead of turning to the north and east because of that strong ridge over the northwest Atlantic, it kind of bends back to the north and west. You saw that there, where it's moving north. We'll backtrack a little bit, and then it kind of backs to the north and west. And look at this intense pressure gradient. That is certainly a red flag for hurricane force conditions from eastern New England all the way to Nova Scotia. This is very early Saturday morning, intense pressure gradient right here. And like the 0Z GFS, it kind of bends back to the north and west and perhaps makes that landfall over the coastal section of Maine here during the day on Saturday. And it is weakening slightly here as it moves over the cooler waters in terms of that central pressure. But look at that pressure gradient. No matter that it's moving over colder and colder waters, that pressure gradient remains very tight with that strong high pressure to the north. And again, that's a big red flag for hurricane force winds in much of eastern New England, especially, let's say, Cape Cod to coastal sections of Maine and to Nova Scotia as well. Here we go all the way into Sunday morning. Now over either Maine, eastern Maine, or the Canadian Maritime provinces by Sunday morning. Of course, it'll weaken once it's over land. But even though it moves over those colder and colder waters as it climbs to higher and higher latitudes, that pressure gradient remains quite intense, raising the red flag for hurricane force winds. Probably late Friday night, Saturday night time frame, eastern New England to Nova Scotia. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, this has been meteorologist Paul Dorian.